As the world is starting to grapple with low fertility rates in many countries, we can look into history to find more about the subject. The collapse of various civilizations such as the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, the Mycenaeans, the Minoans, the Mayans, ancient Egypt, the Sumerians, Akkadians, Indus Valley, the Assyrians, Hittites, and many others will be explained. As we can see from history, there are very many examples of great civilizations that have collapsed. The main reasons for the collapse of major civilizations are primarily depopulation or conquest. We will look at a case-by-case basis for the collapse of the major historical civilizations and examine the reasons for their collapse. Check the description for links where all of this information was gathered from. Civilizations die from suicide, not by murder. Arnold Jane Toynbee. If you look into the past archaeological record, we can see that at the end of every civilization, there's a period of time when the number of members of that society go into steep decline. Usually all or most of the cities of the civilization are abandoned or destroyed, most of which are never occupied again. We can observe this because in ancient cities there's usually a destruction layer that is seen when they are abandoned. Sometimes the cities are occupied again, but it is usually by a different culture, and usually the cities are used for farming, which can be seen by garden layers in the archaeological record of major cities, such as Rome, etc. Sometimes civilizations are destroyed by conquest, however this happens fairly rarely. The most famous example is the fall of the Aztec and Inca empires after being conquered by the Spanish. However, even though they were conquered by the Spanish, the major cause of collapse was the smallpox epidemic that wiped out large numbers of their population. Collapse by conquest usually happens when a civilization has already been depopulated, either by disease or mainly by subreplacement fertility. The Roman Empire is usually the most studied ancient civilization that has collapsed. We can observe some clues as to why the Roman Empire collapsed. One of the causes is that the capital city of ancient Rome, which had a population of about 1.5 million during the reign of Trajan in the early 2nd century AD, declined to only 15,000 inhabitants by the 9th century. The population declined by more than 99% in the space of a few centuries. Similar population declines were seen throughout the entire Roman and Hellenic world. However, even though the population decline was documented, the question is, why did the population decline? There are many reasons for a population to decline, such as plagues, famines, natural disasters, war, etc. However, most civilizations endure plagues, famines, natural disasters, and wars and survive afterwards. Usually a population eventually rebounds after a great crisis. However, there is another reason for a population to decline severely, which is called subreplacement fertility. The Greek historian Polybius largely blamed the decline of the Hellenic world on low fertility rates, writing in his work The Histories that in our time all Greece was visited by a dearth of children and generally a decay of population, owing to which the cities were denuded of inhabitants, and a failure of productiveness resulted, though there were no long-continued wars or serious pestilences among us, for this evil grew upon us rapidly and without attracting attention, by our men becoming perverted to a passion for show and money, and the pleasures of an idle life, and accordingly either not marrying at all, or if they did marry, refusing to rear the children that were born, or at most one or two out of a great number, for the sake of leaving them well off, or for bringing them up in extravagant luxury. A strange experience has been mine. Oh, what shall I call you? Man? But you are not performing any of the offices of men. Citizens? But for all that you are doing, the city is perishing. Romans? But you are undertaking to blot out this name altogether. How otherwise can families continue? How can the state be preserved, if we neither marry nor have children? For surely you are not expecting men to spring up from the ground to succeed you, as the myths describe. And yet it is neither right nor credible that our race should cease and the name of Romans be blotted out with us, and the city be given over to foreigners, Greeks or even barbarians. Do we not free our slaves chiefly for the express purpose of making out of them as many citizens as possible? And do we not give our allies a share in the government in order that our numbers may increase? And do you then, who are Romans from the beginning, and claim as your ancestors the famous Marcii, the Fabii, the Quintii, the Valerii, and the Julii, Do you desire that your families and names alike shall perish with you? Nay, I for my part am ashamed that I have been forced to even mention such a thing. Have done with your madness then, and stop at last to reflect, that with many dying all the time by disease and many in war, it is impossible for the city to maintain itself, unless its population is continually renewed by those who are ever and anon to be born. Urbanization and sub-replacement fertility. As we can see from historic texts and archaeological evidence, the population declined rapidly due to a low fertility rate among the members of the civilizations. However, what caused the fertility rate to be so low? The main and time-tested reason is urbanization. As people moved to the city, their fertility rates declined sharply after a few generations. This is true today and was true in ancient times as well. There is nothing new about the sub-replacement fertility rates that are being seen in the world today. The Roman Empire had very high urbanization rates that were not seen in Europe until after at least the 19th century, and evidently Romans had spent much time in cities for their fertility to decline to very low levels that were seen by Augustus. Why does urbanization reduce fertility? Urbanization reduces fertility generally over a few generations. As the country moves from the beginning of the demographic transition, it moves from a mostly nomadic or rural society to a mostly urban society. And the population densities of ancient cities were even higher than we have today due to no mechanized transport and limited availability of water. It can also be seen that in most countries with high urbanization rates throughout the world, such as Europe and East Asia, the fertility rate is sub-replacement, sometimes far below the 2.1 replacement rate. There have been experiments done by John B.Calhoun on mice that showed that high population density reduces fertility, and the population of the mice colony mirrored the population of Rome. John B. Calhoun's urbanization experiments. In the early 1960s, the National Institute of Mental Health acquired property in a rural area outside Poolesville, Maryland. The facility that was built on this property housed several research projects, including those headed by Calhoun. It was here that his most famous experiment, the mouse universe, was created. In July 1968, 4 pairs of mice were introduced into the utopian universe. The universe was a 9-foot square millipen with 4.5-foot sides. There was no shortage of food or water or nesting material. There were no predators. The only adversity was the limit on space. Initially, the population grew rapidly, doubling every 55 days. The population reached 620 by day 315, after which the population growth dropped markedly, doubling only once every 145 days. The last surviving birth was on day 600, bringing the total population to a mere 2,200 mice, even though the experiment setup allowed for as many as 3,840 mice in terms of nesting space. This period between day 315 and day 600 saw a breakdown in social structure and in normal social behavior. After day 600, the social breakdown continued, and the population declined toward extinction. During this period, females ceased to reproduce, their male counterparts withdrew completely, never engaged in courtship or fighting. They ate, drank, slept, and groomed themselves, all solitary pursuits. Sleek, healthy coats and an absence of scars characterized these males. They were dubbed the beautiful ones. Breeding never resumed, and behavior patterns were permanently changed. The conclusions drawn from this experiment was that when all available spaces are taken and all social roles filled, competition and the stresses experienced by the individuals would result in a total breakdown in complex social behaviors, ultimately resulting in the demise of the population. Calhoun saw the fate of the population of mice as a metaphor for the potential fate of man. Human civilization inevitably leads to greater levels of urbanization. Past civilizations have also come to sub-replacement fertility due to high urbanization rates. The textbook collapse of the major Roman and Greek civilizations can be seen again in the late Bronze Age collapse, the Mayan collapse, and other civilizations. All of these civilizations shared the same fate in the end: the rapid decline of population, the abandonment of cities, and the invasion by barbarians, and can all be attributed to sub-replacement fertility, which the Roman and Greek historians have told us about. The future of humanity. As the majority of the people on Earth in the past have lived in primarily rural areas, we have had sustained growth, especially with the health explosion which has happened recently. However, now the majority of the world is moving into urban cities, and the urbanization rate is increasing all the time. Currently, around 50% of the world lives in sub-replacement fertility countries. By the end of the century, the UN predicts that only a handful of countries will have replacement fertility. If the trend persists, the human race will go extinct like the ancient Romans and the Greeks and the other great civilizations before them. Once the population starts to decline from sub-replacement fertility, it is impossible to stop the decline without immigration. And even immigration is a temporary solution, as the immigrants will also copy the habits of the host population. Eventually, a population with sub-replacement fertility will disappear. Since no past civilization on Earth has been able to survive sub-replacement fertility due to urbanization, we can see that the contemporary solutions available to us have very low chances of success. There is the possibility of artificial wombs, such as in the Matrix where humans are grown. However, we are far away from that technologically. There is the possibility of joining the human consciousness with machines or creating an artificial intelligence. However, again, we are very far away from that technologically. There is also the possibility of genetic engineering, which could somehow raise fertility or make humans immune to the effects of high-density living. We can also make humans immune to disease, reverse aging, eliminate genetic disorders, and increase resistance to cancer. Since Calhoun lived in an age before genetic engineering, he would not have been able to do any experiments on the mice to see if tweaking their DNA will help them survive the mouse utopia. He tried all other options to try to increase the survival rate of the mice by rationing food, space, and other factors. However, nothing worked. But since we have genetic engineering technology available to us now, we should try to use it on the mice to see if we can increase their survival time in a high-density environment. A possible answer to the Fermi paradox. Since the majority of past urbanized civilizations on Earth have succumbed to low fertility, it is conceivable that sub-replacement fertility is the so-called great filter, which means low fertility due to urbanization is the reason we do not see or hear about any other civilization in the universe. As soon as a civilization becomes mostly urbanized, it dies within a few thousand years according to history. So just as soon as the ability to transmit radio signals appears, it is extinguished, in the blink of an eye, in the cosmological terms.